tension in his life, of course, is the mind and the heart. Even when he was a teenager in Central Asia, during the day he would attend the majlis of Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni, the greatest philosophical theologian in the world at the time, with the crack students of the age who'd come to sit at his feet from everywhere. And it was the forms of the syllogism, the construction of arguments, analogy, very refined, elaborate mental gymnastics, which have their place in our civilization. We like to construct good arguments. We've always emphasized logic. And then the classes were over by the Zuhr prayer, and he'd get on his donkey or his mule and trot off to the suburbs of the city in order to sit with a Sufi, Abu Ali al-Farmadi, where a different sort of journey was being celebrated. Not the way of the mind, but the way of the heart. Not the way of logic chopping and demonstration, apodeictic proofs, but instead the affective, possibly that which is closer to what makes us most paradigmatically human. Taught in a rose garden. This is Persia, after all. It's mostly poetry. It's ecstatic. People are sitting in a circle, and as it were, the metaphorical flagons of love are being passed around. So you don't get that kind of intoxication in a logic class. It's dry, and it has to be dry. You have to exclude your humanity and your emotions from the rigorous intellectual construction of arguments in law and in metaphysics. But in Farmadi's gathering, it's the Sufi thing, and the Persian Sufi thing, which is the climax of that civilization, certainly in terms of its literature. And that bifurcation was, of course, on everybody's mind, and leads to his famous crisis: am I sincere? Why do I enjoy sitting in front of the best students in the Islamic world? Why am I accepting the patronage of Nizam al-Mulk, the most powerful man in the world, probably? Why am I hobnobbing, walking the corridors of power, taking the state's dinars, when, quite possibly, I'm just digging my own spiritual and moral grave? I really enjoy my professorial chair and the odium academicum that goes with it, and famously, in the middle of a lecture, he's kind of thunderstruck by this, experiences what we would probably call a breakdown, and just leaves, to the consternation of his students who want him to finish the argument, but he leaves. And he goes, well, not back to the rose garden, but God's rose garden, the wider world, which is where the believer finds his spiritual nourishment, because this is in the Quran. The Quran tells us that faith is gifted by heaven to those who humbly open their hearts to the signs of God in the natural world and in human beings. That's the Quran's argument. Argument from design, but not really philosophical, but rather existential, shaking us and saying, leave aside all of your clever syllogisms, look at all of this. Does it look as if it just emerged from some primordial nothing? Not very likely, is it? That's a kind of argument that's deeper than arguments. It appeals to that which is most commonsensical and real about human beings. And incidentally, it's another thing for us to think about in our world, part of whose ethos has been human mastery of nature. We want to control nature. We queue up to get to the top of Mount Everest at vast expense and personal risk. Why should we want to do that? Because we want to stand on top of the world, and this makes us feel that we've dominated nature, and part of our civilization has said that's how we will achieve happiness, because nature is threatening. It's got tigers in it and But there is, of course, in nature, in its threateningness as well as in its sort of soft rabbit aspects, a lesson for the soul. During Ramadan, I was in the Malay world, and somebody in this gathering said, "Look what I saw when I was driving." He had his phone. He'd been sitting behind the dashboard in the car, and the car stopped, and there was a tiger in front of his car. And the tiger had her cubs by the side of the road, and people had stopped just to look at this thing. And what was interesting is you could immediately see the kind of, what he said, the majesty of this animal and its complete existential indifference to our own egotistic cleverness, the majesty of it just being a tiger and challenging us and making us realize our smallness. It was a sacred moment, and this is what the Quran is telling us, that even in something that could eat you, there is something that is going to spiritually bring you to life. And so the believers have always enjoyed nature. Muslims have always loved gardens, and we've always tried to bring the indicativity of nature into our homes and our sacred spaces. The mosque doesn't have pictures, but the mosque has indications of the geometric indicativity of nature. Islamic decorative art, which is the essence really of our architectural civilization, is about stylized vegetal motifs, tessellations, arabesques, the exploration of the strange Platonic mystery of symmetry and geometry brought to the surface. That's what our art does. It says an infinitesimal distance behind the surface of things, which seem to be kind of messy, there is order, symmetry, perfection. There is a kind of Platonic space where everything is ordered and geometry prevails, not just the snowflake, but the atom. And Muslim art has always sought to remind us of the orderliness of God's creation. And it's very effective. And that's one reason why people like to crowd out those galleries at the British Museum, because on some level they're being told there's something really interesting about the fact that creation is orderly, rather than just what you'd expect from a world without an orderer, which is either nothingness, which is the only logical thing to expect, but some kind of radical fractal chaos. But no, there is order, there are physical constants, there's the speed of light, there is gravity, there are triangles, there are 8-pointed stars, there is real order is part of the fabric of things. And that's what the Quran is saying, ayat li ulil albab, signs for people of lub, the deeper part of ourselves, which is activated through contemplation, not through cleverness. It's not really a function of IQ. It's a function of whether you can overcome the jumping thoughts and the distractions of the lower self and allow the lub, the real self, to ponder these things and to be nourished by them. So another question in our contemporary reality, since that seems to be the puzzle that we set for ourselves today, is if modern man